Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Café con Tampa Online. I'm Bill Carlson, here with my co-host, Del Acosta. Introduce our speaker.
Thank you, Bill, and welcome, everybody. Today, our speaker is Steve Contorno, political editor of the Tampa Bay Times. Steve, tell us what a political editor does for a major regional newspaper.
Yeah, so my title is kind of a little bit of a misnomer because I think people think an editor is, the person who's editing the copy, but I'm actually kind of the lead political correspondent for our newspaper. I follow the races across the state and sort of explain to the country, why Florida is so important, and explain to Floridians and our readers in the area what's going on in the country, and try to figure out this crazy swing state that we live in and give our readers a good sense of how the political grounds and winds are shifting here. Also because this is a state where the stakes are very high. There's a lot of money that gets thrown around. So I like to dig into the money and the power behind our politics too.
So I think let's start national and maybe work down. We could spend 30 minutes just talking about national, but what do you see trends happening in Florida related to the presidential and other national races?
Well, it's really fascinating because, I don't think 4 years ago we would have thought that Donald Trump would be losing so much support with retirees and doing relatively well among Hispanic voters and Latino voters. And so it's right now that one of the major questions is, will Donald Trump's loss of support with retirees be offset by his gains in the Latino community? And that's been just a sort of like a really interesting dynamic to watch. It really shows you how you can think in Florida that you're gaining ground in one area, but because there's so many different campaigns you're running simultaneously, what's happening, you could be losing with another demographic in another part of the state. But you're really seeing the campaigns coalesce around fighting in the I-4 corridor, which I guess shouldn't necessarily be a surprise. But because so much focus was on South Florida in 2016, I thought that that might be where the end of the battle was fought. But you see, with Trump coming to Sanford, coming to Ocala, we had Senator Harris in Orlando earlier this week. Trump is actually outspending Biden in Tampa, which is one of just a handful of markets in the entire country where he's actually outspending Biden. Really shows you how much emphasis he's putting in this area to try to win over and hold on to that support, because the I-4 corridor really won him the state last time. He won the state by 113,000 votes. He won the I-4 corridor by more than 200,000. So this is really where this race is coming down to.
I got a pop-up a little while ago while I was working at home on my computer, and it came from the Times, and it was about an interview that the Pope gave concerning the state of the world. And one of the things he mentioned was he was not opposed to same-sex civil marriages. Do you think there's any relationship of that statement to the Supreme Court justices a few weeks ago wanting to look at same-sex marriages, or do you think those are two mutually exclusive events?
I think that the Pope, over the last 4 years, a lot of his decrees and the statements he's put out there have been quite intentional. It's kind of been one sort of long subtweet of the president, more or less. And he never really, he has called out the president in explicit terms, but it does seem like he brings up a lot of topics that are popping up in American politics and popping up in the world, especially as it relates to immigration, as it relates to this move of authoritarianism. You really see him kind of stepping out and being a counter voice. So while I don't know what's going on inside the head of the Pope, it would certainly fit that pattern of what we've seen over the last 4 years.
So we, just for anybody watching live, if you have a question, post it underneath the feed or to the right of the feed, depending on where you're watching. And whether you're watching live or not, please click the like button, and please click the share button. We do this as a free public service to provide information to the public. So please do that. We have our first question from the floor. Rusty Carpenter asks, what impact is Bloomberg and his money having in Florida?
That's the $100 million question, I guess, because if Biden loses, there's going to be a lot of people wondering what the heck that money was spent on, and if he wins, I'm sure he'll be taking credit for it. But there are certain targeted areas where they feel like they can move the needle with that money. One is with Latino and Hispanic voters, and there's been a huge outreach in terms of Spanish language advertising, especially in South Florida and around the Orlando area, trying to turn this population back toward Democrats after their, sort of flirtation with President Trump. So that's one aspect of it. Another is, for the first time, we're seeing the Biden campaign have some sort of ground game, and that's being fueled by Bloomberg dollars. Biden kind of went dark in terms of running any sort of in-person campaign for most of the summer because of the coronavirus precautions. And while, for public health reasons that may have made sense, it basically ceded the entire state to President Trump for those 6 months. Biden's campaign, meanwhile, went mostly to a digital and texting enterprise for those 6 months. So it's going to really be a test of whether ground game can get up and going at this point in the race. And then it's just advertising. It's so expensive to run ads in this state, and having $100 million windfall, not only does it give Biden the ability to basically blanket the state with ads all up through the rest of the election, but it forces Trump to run a lot of advertising here too. And Trump's money is really running out faster than anyone expected for a campaign that basically had $1 billion to play with. And so being forced to run money here when you have dwindling resources means you can't run money in Wisconsin, where he's in a very tight race, or Pennsylvania or Michigan, or even Iowa, where polls today show that the president is losing to Vice President Biden. So that's kind of what the strategy is behind that $100 million. I've heard quite a few Democratic operatives say this is a game changer. I've heard others sort of suggest, it's too much, too late.
We all know the I-4 corridor is important in the state of Florida. I think that's known internationally. What are the chances of Biden taking Texas?
Texas, Georgia, even like North Carolina, I think are going to be really tough for him when you just look at the demographics of those states. They still sort of have that conservative bent to them. I think we're still probably a couple election cycles away from Texas and Georgia being competitive. That said, if by chance this is a wave election where we see not only Trump or Biden win Florida by 4 or 5 points, then it means that the entire map we're looking at a landslide in that case. The polling isn't really indicating that, and I'd be hesitant to predict that this will be the cycle that we see any of those sort of traditional Republican states go blue. I think you're more likely to see Democrats have success in flipping or maintaining their leads in the Mountain West, in the Southwest, where there are growing Hispanic populations who are much more predisposed to being hostile to President Trump because of his rhetoric on the type of populations that are emigrating to the United States from other countries. So I don't know if Texas is in play this cycle. I'm not even sure it's next cycle. I think it's just one of those things that you just have to keep an eye on over time. But if it is a wave election, and the map is blown completely open, then who knows what's going to happen. It is interesting that the president is in Macon, Georgia this late in the race. You would think that he wouldn't need to shore up support there. And I don't know if that signals concern there, or if that signals that he's trying to, if there's multiple media markets in play where he's, hitting Georgia, but also kind of hitting the panhandle. It's interesting to see how they sort of play the chessboard in that sense.
So let's, if you don't mind, let's segue to the Senate races that are not now, but will be coming up. If Trump wins, what will be the impact? If Biden wins, what will be the impact? And what candidates do you see coming up?
So there's that sort of immediately after a new president takes office, the country kind of counter balances itself usually, and the incumbent party doesn't necessarily do too well. I don't know if we're going to see that, or if we're going to see a massive sort of reckoning within the Republican Party that leaves them in trouble in 2022. I don't want to. I wouldn't predict, sort of what's going to happen, but I think. Regardless, we're going to see an interesting race in Florida. If Trump wins, I think it's entirely possible that Senator Rubio finds himself in Trump's administration. It's been rumored before, in which case you're going to have a wide open race for Senate. You're going to probably see people like Matt Gaetz maybe get involved and try to run for Senate on the Republican side, and then on the Democratic side, you'll probably see a free for all. But regardless, if Rubio's running for re-election, then obviously he's going to be the candidate probably untested on the Republican side. And then on the left, you're going to see there's a lot of rumors about Stephanie Murphy, the congresswoman from the Orlando area. She has won strong races in a pretty purple, you could even say slightly red part of the state, and she's done very well there. I think her message, Democrats believe, can translate to running a statewide campaign. But we also saw, Val Demings, a congresswoman from the neighboring district, really step out onto the national scene and make a name for herself. Her testimony, or her work on the two House committees that tackled impeachment put her in the national spotlight. And then she also was considered a vice presidential pick for Joe Biden. So she really has her pick of what she's going to do next. She could go into try to challenge Stephanie Murphy or whatever Democrat goes in against Rubio and try to make a play for Senate, or she could move back to Florida and be one of the heavy hitters in what is going to be a wide open field for Democrats to take on Ron DeSantis.
What do you feel the temperature of Floridians, say on the I-4 corridor, is towards climate change?
I would say that it's interesting when you watch Republicans, especially that are in elected office, more and more are at least giving lip service to the idea of climate change, even if they're not willing to concede the facts about it being a man-made phenomenon. You have pretty much universal support on a lot of environmental causes, like offshore drilling, for example, in the Republican Party. And you see people like U.S. Representative Matt Gaetz coming out strongly as a believer of climate change and offering a counterproposal to the Green New Deal. Governor Ron DeSantis sort of distanced himself from Rick Scott, who sort of had a reputation for being a climate change denier. DeSantis came in and hired a resiliency officer right off the bat, and a move that kind of surprised a lot of people. And Rick Scott himself, now that he's in the Senate, has shifted his rhetoric. He's gone from being someone who's been pretty skeptical of climate change to someone who's saying, I believe the science, and of course this is happening. So I think that probably indicates that the support for climate change, or the belief that climate change is happening, is growing pretty broadly across the political spectrum, and is moving away from something that is Republicans versus Democrats. But how the issue is approached is still very much, there's still very much divisions, where you see Democrats wanting to engage in wholesale regulations, Republicans, meanwhile, feeling that we can innovate our way out of this. And I think you're seeing the two parties sort of fall along those lines, not just at the top level, but even among supporters. But I know a lot of people who live in St. Pete, who live near the water, who say they see flooding in their neighborhoods that they never saw a decade or so ago. So to them, it's not just something theoretical; it's something that's happening now. On sunny days in South Florida, you get king tides that creep into the streets. So for a lot of people, like I said, this isn't theoretical, and I think that's going to move the needle more and more for even Republicans.
So back to the political landscape, you talked about the potential Senate race in the future. So in 2 years, we have governor and cabinet. Can you talk more about what you think might happen there? Who might be some of the candidates who might run against the incumbents?
Yeah, so it's kind of all eyes on Nikki Fried, right? I mean, she's the lone Democrat who has a has a statewide office right now. You know, does she want to go for 4 more years in that office? Likely, probably running against Senator Wilton Simpson, who's has deep roots with the agriculture community. He's much better known than Matt Caldwell, who she went against 4 years ago. He's probably going to have a lot more money behind him. So do you want to get in a really tough race for reelection and for agriculture commissioner, or do you want to make the jump to governor? And I think people are going to be watching her really early next year after the Democrats hold their reorganization committee or hearings to try to figure out who their leadership is going to be going forward. I expect to see Nikki Fried make a move probably in the first half of next year toward a decision on that. And then after that, you kind of have a lot of people already sort of dipping their toe in the water. I think you saw a lot of people open, Ann Eshoomani, the state rep from the Orlando area, is someone who's really opened a lot of eyes because she's a true progressive and she was very active in helping people get help from during the state's unemployment crisis. And at the same time, you had Senator Pizzo down in South Florida doing the same thing and getting a lot of bipartisan kudos for the work that he did down there. So I think those are two names to watch. Val Demings, people are going to be wondering what she's going to do next. Gwen Graham, who ran 4 years ago, or excuse me, 2 years ago, she's probably someone who could throw her hat in the rink again. I think it'll be interesting to see, after we've had this election cycle where we've had quite a few mayors jump into presidential races, if any of the mayors in Florida decide to get in as well.
What about Rick Kreisman?
I've heard from folks that he actually loves like the legislative side more. I would imagine that if Charlie Crist ever decided not to run for Congress, then it's more likely that you'll see Kreisman try to jump into a congressional race than run for governor or attorney general. I think he wants, but he's definitely a name that's been thrown around. Buckhorn also gets tossed out there. Does the mayor of Miami Beach, who's been very adversarial with Governor DeSantis lately. He's someone who's really well liked among Democrats. Does he get in the game? So those are a bunch of names that I think are sort of waiting in the wings as well.
One thing, Del, just forgive me just for a second. I have to mention Anna Eshoomani, who just has a fantastic personality and is a really hard worker, whatever you think politically. She started, I follow this on Twitter. She was tweeting a couple days ago, and Mark Hamill, the guy who played Luke Skywalker, started liking her tweets. And then she tagged him and he started retweeting and they started communicating. And now it's today or tomorrow, they're doing fundraising together. He's helping her with fundraising.
She's very social media savvy, and she's actually had like quite a few people sort of throwing her name out there. And I wouldn't be, I think it, her the sky's the limit for her potential. But it's just, where does she pick her next step? She might be drawn out of her district after the next redistricting. Democrats in Tallahassee have kind of have given her the cold shoulder a bit. So I'm really curious to see if she makes a push for, maybe she goes for Stephanie Murphy's congressional seat if Stephanie Murphy runs for Senate.
You've mentioned a lot of names in the political landscape. One of them that you haven't mentioned, who's pretty prominent, is Pam Bondi. Where do you see her in the future?
I think she's enjoying having a job that doesn't require her to run for office again. But she's been very prominent in the Trump administration. She had that job working on his impeachment defense team. She's, been one of his top surrogates on the campaign trail. She's done a lot of Women for Trump events. But she went to DC to become a lobbyist and went to work for a very powerful law firm in Ballard Partners. And I imagine once she gets outside of this window where she's required to she can't lobby for a period of time because she did join Trump's team. I think once she gets outside that window, she probably will go back into lobbying because she tested the waters for for doing a sort of a media gig and doing like the Fox thing. And I think the lobbying job is what she thought it was a better fit for her because it allowed for her to get back to Tampa more often. She wouldn't have to stay in New York as much. And I don't think she's interested in running for office again anytime soon. But, she has a lot of options, and she'll have to weigh them after President Trump leaves office, just like a lot of Republicans who have attached themselves will have to do.
I've got to ask this. Is there any truth to, and I just call it gossip, about her? They're trying to put her on the short list for the Supreme Court.
I don't know if that's like her name getting added as like a way to boost her name or what have you. I didn't hear anything serious about that. I think it was just one of those things where she's been a loyal supporter of the president, and he, put out a list of names, and so she was on it or was rumored to be on it. But I didn't hear anything serious. And they're one of the reasons why she didn't get a job in the administration, from what I've heard, is that she wasn't interested in a job where she would have to go through some sort of Senate testimony that would, put Trump University and all those kinds of things back in the spotlight. I think she was happy to sort of have a very different role.
I want to ask you about another kind of new constituency, which is Generation Z. For years, we talked about millennials. I'm from Generation X. But now Generation Z, my son is 18. He voted for the first time, is about to vote again. What influence do you think Generation Z will have on this election?
Yeah, the kind of after Parkland and 2018, we saw this surge in youth participation in the election, and turnout among young people in Florida was quite high in 2018. The hype around them have been a little bit quieter this election, and I don't know if that's because there's little activity on college campuses right now because of the coronavirus, or if it's just sort of political reporters like myself maybe missing the fact that there's a sleeping giant out there, and we're missing it because history for X number of years has said young people don't show up to vote as much. But I will say that the Democrats, a big part of Joe Biden's youth outreach effort is really focused on like historically Black colleges and students on those campuses. And on the Trump side, I've been surprised at the turnout of young people at his events. When you're around the villages and stuff like that, obviously it's older individuals. But I went to like a Don Jr. event in Tampa just a few weeks ago, and I would say half the crowd was probably under the age of 35. And that was surprising to me. And I think that if Trump wins again, you might see sort of an interesting generational shift among sort of these media savvy, social media eccentric, young Trump branded voters. They're going to, they're carving out a niche for themselves on the internet, and they're growing their online personalities. And it'll be interesting to see how that influences the young vote going forward.
Del, you want to ask the last question or second to last question?
Well, tomorrow night is a presidential debate. If you were able to ask the question, if you were on the panel as a moderator, what question would you ask them?
Oh, wow. That's a good one. I haven't thought about it. We haven't all these candidates come to town, and they've done almost no media events. So I'm on the spot here, I guess. We've really focused. There's been questions on climate change and healthcare and all those kinds of things. I think that the questions that really get at the type of leaders that they would be over the next 4 years. Trump hasn't really laid out an agenda for 4 more years. He's really kind of running on what he says he's accomplished in his previous 4 years. So I would kind of try to probe and see, where he wants to go going forward. And for Biden, who has focused a lot of the race on being a counterweight to Trump or bringing in a new era, I'd be really interested to get a sense of how he expects to get anything done in a Washington that is so divided right now, because he's got all these plans. Is he willing to allow Senate Democrats to blow up the filibuster to get his agenda across, or does he think that he has the ability to bring Republicans over? And what gives him that confidence, given that there's been no sort of bipartisan cooperation at all in Washington over these last 4 years?
We got a question from the audience. Greg Wilson asks, with all the noise from the top of the ballot, as well as your astute observations, are down ballot races like state representative, county, or municipals doomed to obscurity and voting drop off, given the limited capacity of news organizations to cover them?
That's a great question. And, it's unfortunate that we don't have the ability to cover them as much. I will say that we published a voter guide of all the local candidates and all the responses to our questions. And it's gotten crazy good web traffic on our website. So people are interested in those races. And I think you've actually seen the Democrats get more interested or more competitive in running candidates in those down ballot races. I talked to the Democratic head of the Seminole County Party, and she said that they're running candidates in 10 more races than they did 4 years ago. So I think there's a concerted effort among Democrats to boost turnout from the bottom up, as opposed to from the top down. If you have candidates running in local races, the idea is that they're going to be out there campaigning with their friends and family, and that's going to be an ambassador for the Democratic ticket. So while I do bemoan the lack of resources to give the same attention to the local candidates as we give the national candidates, because when we do a great job of it. If you haven't read our Josh Solomon's profile of Anna Paulina Luna, for example, who's running in against Charlie Crist in St. Petersburg for Congress, give it a read. It's really revealing. So when we do it, we do a great job. But at the same time, I do think that there is a concerted effort by the parties to run more candidates, to be more competitive in these races. And it's going to be really interesting to see what that effect has on not just Democrats winning more races statewide, but pushing that support up the ticket.
Well, thank you so much for doing this today. Do you have any other final thoughts or observations on the election? And then can you please tell people about your newsletter and anything else you want from the paper?
Yeah, I think my one advice is that we have this tendency in our country to want the election results immediately. And I think people need to be prepared for the fact that that's not going to happen tonight or this year. Mail ballots are going to be coming in late. You're going to have long lines until 7 o'clock to vote. There's a lot of states that aren't as adept and prepared for a rush of mail-in ballots. We might have problems with the post office. So be prepared for the election results to not be known for a few days, and be wary of candidates who are trying to claim victory while there's still a lot of ballots out there to be counted. I think that's something we really need to stress this year, especially. And I hope that the national media takes that message to heart, and I hope people are prepared for that. But otherwise, I just want to say thank you for this opportunity. I went to plenty of these of Café con Tampas when I covered Hillsborough County back when they were on South Howard. So glad to participate. And you can find me on Twitter at Contorno. And if you want to sign up for our weekly Florida politics newsletter, I think it's something that we offer that's different than all the other political newsletters that are out there. You can sign up for that at tampabay.com/newsletters/thebuzz.
And thank you so much, everybody, for watching. Again, if you haven't already, please hit the like button and hit the share button so we can make sure that as many people as possible see this. And you can't see my sticker, but I voted today. People are talking about long lines. Don't use that as the excuse not to vote. I went to Port Tampa Community Center, which is 5 minutes from Jan Platt Library, and there was no wait. I walked right in and got to vote. So there, you can look at the whole list of all the early voting places, find a time of day, find a place, but please, we need full participation so that we have representative government. Thank you so much to everybody, and see you next time. Thanks, Steve.